Now let's look at the various different types of exposures you can do. So first of all, cross-hedging minor currency exposure. Basically, US dollar, Canadian dollar, British pound, euro, Swiss franc, like a major world currency is easy to hedge. But everything else is basically minor currency. For example, Swedish krona, Korean won. So all the minor currencies is difficult, expensive, sometimes even impossible to use this financial contract to hedge exposure to minor currencies. So these cases, you can use the cross-hedging. So cross-hedging involves hedging a position in one asset by taking a position in another asset. So the correlation matters. Let's see the examples. An example would be the US importer with liability in the Swedish krona, hedging with long or short forward contract on the euro. The thing is, if the krona changes, movement is very similar to the euro, then you don't need to actually hedging against the krona, you just use euro, right? So if their call move, then it's gonna be good hedge, but they really need to have high correlation, and they call very in a predictable way. So that's how cross-hedging work. So if you cross-hedge minor currency, then you may use the major currency with high correlation with these minor currencies. Okay. Contingent exposure. Contingent exposure is a situation in which the firm may or may not be subject to exchange exposure. So sometimes we are not sure that we need to pay or not. Okay, so this is the case. Suppose GE is bidding on hydroelectric car in Quebec, Canada. They just bid. So if this bid is accepted, then what happens is GE is receiving Canadian dollar, 100 million Canadian dollars to initiate the project. Since GE may or may not face exchange exposure, depending on whether its bid will be accepted or not, it faces a typical contingent exposure situation. So there are three options you can have. So first of all, you don't do anything, do nothing. If bid is accepted, then you basically receive Canadian dollar, $100 million, and it's unhedged. So you have unhedged long position in 100 million Canadian dollars. Bid rejected, nothing happened, right? So no exposure. Now let's short Canadian dollar forward. If bid is accepted, then you are fully covered, so there's no exposure. But if bid is rejected, then you probably have uncovered, unhedged short position in Canadian dollar, $100 million. So you need to handle that. Because anyway, you have to pay, right? Now let's buy option. So buy a put option on Canadian dollar. Now, if the future spot price becomes less than the exercise price, it means that you will exercise this option. So if bid is accepted, then it converts Canadian $100 million at the exercise price. If it is rejected, then exercise this option and make a profit, right? You just make money from this option. If the future spot rate becomes greater so that you don't exercise it, then if bid is accepted, then just you exchange this Canadian dollar, $100 million at a spot rate and pay it. Or just a bid rejected, you pay option premium. Just let option expire. So you have three choices, and each choice, each strategy lead to the little different exposure in each case. Now, hedging recurrent exposure with swaps. So swap contract also may be used because swap contract is cheaper. So if this exposure is recurrent, then you can have lower cost swap instead of having just one-time forward contract. Okay. It is also the case that swaps are available in longer term than futures and forwards. So swap may be also used as a hedging way, especially for recurrent exposure. Hedging through invoice currency. So the firm also can shift, share, and diversify this exchange risk by appropriately choosing the currency of invoice. So you basically can choose invoice, like you can pay dollar, you can pay pound. So if Boeing invoiced $50 million rather than 10 million pounds, then they don't have to face this exchange exposure anymore, right? But it's basically not eliminating this exposure. They actually transfer actually the exchange exposure to British importer, right? So British Airways now have account payable denominated in US dollars, which means that they have problem, they have exposure. So there may be some contract that, well, let's share this risk by into two, such as the Boeing can share the exposure with British Airways by invoicing half of the bill dollar, half of the bill pounds, so that they can share. So it depends on the contract, but you can also share the risk too. Hedging via lead and lag. So the firm also can reduce transaction exposure is leading and lagging foreign currencies receipts and payments. Leading means the pay and collect early. Lagging means the pay or collect late. So a timing issue. The firm usually would like to lead the softer currency, which is the one that has high volatility. So usually the fluctuating one, the smaller economy, developing country currencies. To avoid the loss from the depreciation of soft currency, and they lack the hard currency because they want to get benefit from the appreciation of the hard currency, which is a currency issued by the nation that more politically, economically stable. Okay. So they choose the timing to hedge the transaction exposure too. Exports and netting. So this multinational firm should not consider deals in isolation, which means that they should not consider case by case. No, they have a lot of projects. They have a lot of things that need to be hedged. MNC does not have to hedge one by one. They should focus on hedging the firm as a portfolio of currency position. Makes sense, right? For example, US firm may have an account payable in euro and at the same time account receivable in Danish crowns. Considering that the euro and crown often move against the dollar near in the lockstep, the firm can just wait until this account become due and then buy euro spot with crowns. Basically, it can be wasteful and necessary to buy euro forward and sell crowns forward, right? Because you really don't handle this one by one. So in other words, if the firm has a portfolio of currency position, it basically makes sense that the hedging residual exposure is better rather than hedging each currency position separately. Okay. So it's called the exposure netting. Exposure netting. So the question is, should the firm hedge? Should the firm hedge? Some people say that, oh, they don't need to hedge. Hedging by firm may not add to shareholders' wealth if the shareholder can manage exposure themselves. Hedging may not reduce the non-diversifiable risk, right, of the firm, because hedging itself just diversify the exchange rate risk, but not non-diversifiable risk. Therefore, shareholders who hold a diversified portfolio are not benefited when management hedges, basically, because it's costly. So it basically comes from the information asymmetry. The managers have better information than shareholders. So the firm may be able to hedge at better price than the shareholders, right? So, sometimes hedging is not appropriate for everyone. So depending on the situation, depending on, many people has different type of the attitude about this hedging, but at least they need to actually also concern that the shareholders who hold the diversified portfolio cannot get enough benefit than the managers who run a company. So what risk management product do firms use? The most United States firms meet their exchange rate risk needs for, they use the forward swap option contract. if they have greater involvement in international business, then they have more work on the exchange rate risk management. So this is survey result of the foreign exchange risk management product by the United States firms. And these are the contract they can use. And the 93.1% actually, the US firm used the fourth contract to hedge their exchange rate risk. Pretty huge, right? So there's various ways to use the various ways to hedge against the transaction exposure, and the US firms fairly well know this problem know pretty well. Okay, so that's the end of the chapter 8, management of transaction exposure. Thank you.